That night, I was home alone and it was pouring rain outside. My house was located on the outskirts of town, with almost no neighbors nearby. It was rare to see anyone passing by, especially in such terrible weather. Night had fallen early, and the rain was pounding against the windows, the droplets hitting the glass like persistent taps, creating a constant, muffled thudding sound. I was sitting on the couch, absent-mindedly watching TV. The warm, soft light of the living room gave me a sense of safety, making the outside world feel distant. The damp air that came with the rain made everything feel heavy, and I was starting to drift off. It was around 11 o'clock when I decided to turn off the TV and head to bed. That's when I heard it, a faint knock at the door. At first, I thought it was just the rain making noises against the windows, but then the knock came again, clearer and more deliberate. I snapped out of my sleepy daze, my senses sharpening. Who would be knocking at my door on a night like this? I lived in a remote area, and I hadn't invited anyone over. Feeling uneasy, I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Outside, it was pitch black. Rain poured off the roof, but there was no one in sight. I waited a few seconds, squinting into the darkness, but still saw nothing, only the endless downpour. I let out a breath, telling myself it was probably just my imagination. Maybe the wind had rattled something against the door. I turned around, ready to head back to the couch. But then the knock came again, a third time, louder and more insistent. I froze in place, my hand gripping the back of a chair as a surge of anxiety shot through me. That sound was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was definitely at the door. My heart began to race, and I hesitated for a moment, not sure whether to check again or simply ignore it. Eventually, I decided not to open the door. Instead, I made sure the locks were secure and cautiously retreated back to the living room. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it had to be the weather playing tricks on me. But the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. The rain continued to beat heavily against the house, creating a cacophony of noise. But underneath it all, I could still hear the persistent knocking. Each knock seemed to resonate with a strange urgency, as if something was trying to get my attention, and it was growing more impatient. I sat on the couch, my breath quickening, my mind racing with possibilities. Who could possibly be out there in this storm? Why would anyone be standing at my door in such heavy rain, without a car or any apparent reason? And why wouldn't they respond when I checked? Then another knock, this time louder, like someone pounding on the door. I couldn't take it anymore. Grabbing a kitchen knife for comfort, I cautiously edged toward the door again, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew the knife wouldn't do much, but it gave me a false sense of security. I stood there for a moment, listening. The rain was relentless, but aside from that, there was silence. I swallowed hard, gathering my courage, and slowly looked through the peephole again. Nothing. The porch was empty. The rain continued to pour down in thick sheets, but there was no sign of anyone or anything outside. Just as I started to feel relieved, I heard it, a soft whisper, almost imperceptible, as if someone was right behind me. The voice was faint, like the murmur of wind, but unmistakable. I whipped around, my heart leaping into my throat. There was no one there. The house was empty, exactly as I had left it. The warm glow of the lamps seemed almost mocking now, as though they couldn't protect me from whatever was lurking in the shadows. I bolted to my bedroom, locking the door behind me, and crouched on my bed, clutching the knife, my hands trembling. The rain drummed endlessly against the roof, a rhythmic, relentless noise that felt suffocating in the silence of my fear. The knocking didn't come again, but the memory of that strange, persistent sound haunted me through the rest of the night. When morning finally came, the storm had passed, and everything outside was eerily calm. Summoning my courage, I unlocked my bedroom door and cautiously stepped into the hallway. The house looked just as it always did, as if nothing unusual had happened. I forced myself to go to the front door, determined to put the whole ordeal behind me. But what I saw chilled me to the bone. The door was covered in wet, smudged handprints, like someone had been frantically banging on it all night long. And yet, there were no footprints in the mud outside, no signs that anyone had ever stood there. From that day on, I could never be comfortable alone in that house again. And on rainy nights, that feeling of dread would creep back, as if reminding me that some things never really leave, not even with the morning light. That night, the rain was coming down hard, with the wind driving it fiercely against the windows. It sounded like a storm was about to swallow the whole town. I was lying in bed, ready to end my day. After a few minutes of scrolling through my phone, I started to feel sleepy. My house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, with only a few nearby homes. The area was peaceful, especially at night, and apart from the sound of the rain, there was rarely any noise on the empty streets. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from the security camera installed at my front door, alerting me to some movement. This was unusual, as there was rarely any activity in front of my house at such a late hour, and even less so on a rainy night like this. Feeling a bit curious, I opened the security camera app to check the live feed. The camera's view was blurry due to the rain pouring down on the lens. Water streaked across the screen, distorting the image, but I could faintly make out a shadowy figure standing at the far end of my porch. The figure was dressed in a heavy black raincoat, standing still, slightly hunched forward, as if they were listening intently for something. My first thought was that this person might have simply gone to the wrong house. After all, in this kind of weather, visibility was poor, and it was easy to get disoriented. I figured the person would soon realize their mistake and leave, so I put my phone down, expecting them to move on. A few minutes later, the camera sent another notification. My unease grew as I checked the footage again. The figure was still there, standing perfectly still in the same spot, not even shifting their weight or moving an inch. Their unwavering posture began to unsettle me. Who would stand outside my door like that, in a downpour, without trying to knock or seek shelter? I stared at the screen, trying to get a clearer view. I adjusted the camera's angle and zoomed in on the figure as much as I could. The raincoat's hood was pulled low, obscuring their face completely, but their eerie stillness made me feel increasingly anxious. I remembered hearing about some recent home invasions in the area, and suddenly the idea of a random stranger standing at my door in the middle of the night didn't seem so harmless. I debated calling the police, but then something changed. The figure slowly moved. They lifted their head slightly and turned toward the camera. Though the rain still made the footage unclear, I knew they were staring directly at the camera, as if aware I was watching. A shiver ran down my spine. It felt like their cold gaze was piercing through the screen, right at me. Even though I couldn't see their face, I could sense hostility and malice emanating from their presence. Then, without warning, the figure walked up to my door and knocked, just a quiet, deliberate knock that cut through the noise of the rain. I sat bolt upright, my heart racing. I didn't dare answer the door. Every instinct I had told me that this wasn't a lost neighbor or someone who needed help. I quickly grabbed my phone, no longer hesitating to call the police. But as soon as I pressed the call button, the live camera feed went black. The power in the house suddenly cut out, plunging everything into total darkness. Even the streetlights outside had gone out. My house was now shrouded in the oppressive silence of a power outage, with only the relentless sound of rain pounding against the roof. I stood frozen, straining my ears to listen for any sounds outside. In the eerie stillness, I could hear my heartbeat, louder than anything else. Then there was another knock on the door, soft but insistent. It felt as though the person outside knew I was standing just on the other side. In that moment, I realized they were still there. Whoever it was hadn't left. I tried to steady my shaking hands, fumbling my way to the kitchen to grab a small knife. It wouldn't do much to protect me, but it gave me some semblance of security. I cautiously approached the front door again, pressing my ear against the wood, listening intently for any movement. The knocking stopped. The rain continued to pour, but there was now an ominous silence outside my door. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or more terrified. Just as I started to back away, I heard footsteps. Soft, deliberate steps coming from the side of the house. Someone was circling the property. My breath caught in my throat. I moved quickly but quietly toward the living room window, carefully peeking through a small gap in the curtains. There, standing by the side of the house, was the figure in the raincoat, peering into my living room window. They were as still as a statue, their face still obscured by the hood, completely indifferent to the rain. It was as though they were watching for any sign of movement inside. waiting for me to reveal myself. I yanked the curtains shut, heart pounding wildly. I frantically tried to call the police again, but my phone was still dead. No signal. The power outage had taken out both my electricity and my cell service. I was trapped in the dark, with that figure just outside the window, separated from me by nothing more than a thin pane of glass. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound, hoping that the figure wouldn't realize I was right there, just feet away. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Then, finally, I heard the faint sound of police sirens in the distance, a sound that felt like salvation. The figure must have heard them too, because I suddenly heard their footsteps moving away, disappearing into the rain. When the police arrived, the power came back on. Trembling, I opened the door and explained everything. The officers searched the area, but found no trace of the figure. No footprints in the mud, nothing left behind. The camera footage showed only a rain-soaked shadow at my door. They couldn't identify who it was, and the person never returned. It was as if they had never really been there at all. But I know what I saw that night. And every time it rains, I can't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see that raincoat-clad figure standing there, watching and waiting. It was a cold, damp Friday night. I had just finished a busy week of work. As a freelance graphic designer, I was used to working late at home alone. My apartment was in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of the city, surrounded by elderly neighbors who rarely ventured out after 9 p.m. The rain had been falling steadily. Listening to the patter against the window, I thought about how I could finally relax. I made a cup of hot tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and settled on the couch to watch the latest episode of my favorite mystery series. Just as I was completely engrossed in the plot, a sudden knock at the door made me jump. I glanced at the wall clock. It was nearly midnight. Who could it be at this hour? I'd lived here for almost 2 years and never had such a late visitor. I paused the show and tiptoed to the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness in the hallway. "Who is it?" I called out, but there was no answer. I was about to turn back when the knocking resumed, more urgent this time. My heart started racing, and I swallowed nervously. "Who are you looking for?" I asked again, my voice trembling slightly. Still no answer, just the persistent knocking. I began to feel uneasy, wondering if I should call the police. Then, suddenly, the knocking stopped. I sighed in relief, thinking the visitor had left. But just as I was about to step away from the door, a sharp scratching sound came from the other side, as if someone was dragging their nails across it. The sound sent chills down my spine. I hurriedly backed away, grabbing my phone from the table by the door. With shaking hands, I dialed 911, but only got a busy signal. I tried several times, all with the same result. That's when I realized my phone showed no signal. I rushed to the window, hoping to find a neighbor to help, but outside was pitch black. Even the streetlights had gone out. Panicking, I began checking all the doors and windows. Alarmingly, I found they were all locked, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't open them. I felt like I was trapped in an airtight box. Just then, the lights in the apartment flickered a few times before going out completely. I stood in the darkness, my heartbeat so loud it seemed to drown out everything else. The rain sounded even louder now, as if it might swallow the whole world. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, but it was completely dead, refusing to turn on. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just a power outage, I reassured myself. But deep down, a voice told me it wasn't that simple. I carefully moved through the darkness, searching for candles or a flashlight. As I was feeling my way through the living room, a flash of lightning illuminated the entire space for a split second. In that moment, I saw a figure standing in the center of the room, facing my direction. I screamed in terror, stumbling backward and falling to the ground. I closed my eyes and screamed until my throat hurt. When I opened them again, I found myself lying on the couch, the TV still playing the show I'd been watching. I gasped for air, drenched in cold sweat. Was it all just a nightmare? I checked the time. Only 20 minutes had passed. I sighed in relief, laughing at how easily I'd been scared. I stood up, deciding to splash some water on my face to clear my head. As I passed through the entryway, a detail made my blood run cold. On the doormat, there was a trail of wet footprints leading from the front door to the center of the living room, then vanishing. I stood there, unable to move, feeling the world crumble beneath my feet. What was going on? Had someone really been here? Or had my nightmare somehow become reality? I dared not think further, feeling a chill run from my feet to my head. After that night, I never stayed in that apartment again. I moved, changed jobs, tried to forget that terrifying night. But every rainy night, I remember those eerie footprints and the mysterious figure standing in my living room. Perhaps some things can never be explained. That's today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.